I grew up in Mountain Brook, Alabama, over the hill of Iron Mountain, and Vulcan's buttocks was the panoramic view, you know. And there wasn't a whole lot of interaction with Jim Crow in Mountain Brook that was visible. We were really lucky. I mean, it was beautiful. It was a paradise. You know, you had beautiful creeks running through it. I had a creek running around half our, I think 1/3 acre off of Memory Lane. And Daddy had built the first ranch-style house in Birmingham, and it was ecologically fabulous. He had little marble pieces on the roof to deflect the heat and the sun, and he had floor-to-ceiling windows that were turned in a certain way that we would get a breeze if we opened up the windows that would go through the house, because not many people, I don't know who had AC then. And he had cork floors, and we had cisterns, and it was very ecological, way ahead of his time. But I think pretty unattractive for Mountain Brook people, you know, in their neo-colonial homes and Tudor. But anyway, I grew up in that home, and that was a lot of fun with the creeks and the mountains, and we were free to roam. I mean, I took my bike one time all the way to Vulcan with Emmy Lou Bales, who was, her daddy was a senator. My great-grandfather, he was president, CEO of Slough Sheffield. A decade, I guess. He had a club car at that time. All those folks had club cars, and he hooked up to one of the trains leaving from Birmingham going to New York for a big conference, steel conference in New York City, and he was staying at the Waldorf when it was the real Waldorf. And at that time, you pulled your club cars, the tracks pulled the cars underneath. Isn't that amazing? And so the train would back up the car and uncouple that club car. Anyway, he died from pneumonia. He had been swimming in Magnolia Springs in Alabama, South Alabama. And he got this telegram that said, "We need you urgently," and he didn't dry off, and he just was driven to his club car, and he really didn't dry off, as the story goes. Anyway, he died in the Waldorf Astoria from pneumonia, and he came back in a box in his club car. You know. Well, I have to say something really great about him, since there is that story, which is just horrifying. He was responsible for the coke oven to be redesigned and rebuilt so that the toxic fumes were taken off, and it saved countless, oh, I might get teary, it saved countless African-American lives. So my great-grandfather did that. I was 5. I was sent to a Catholic school, St. Francis. It was just beginning, and I noticed that there were no black children there. And I wondered, what in the world was I doing here? And it was in the basement, so already that was kind of creepy. You know? And the 1st and 2nd grades were together. The 3rd and 4th were together, and Sister Mary Paul was my teacher. And I just remember going home and wondering, and I asked Mary Mack, my maid, housekeeper, nanny, second mom, maybe first mom, you know, where do your children go to school, you know? And then I didn't understand why she had to come in the back door, and eventually that stopped, you know. Then we would go down to Destin. We had still one of the last cottages, original cottages in Destin. And since we were 4 children and parents, there was not a whole lot of room for Mary Mack, so she would have to come on the bus. And then also, sometimes when we would go on short trips, I would ask her, why isn't she coming in to get a sandwich with us? Anyway, I was really young and confused and angry at the get-go. Which my parents, they just would shake their heads. We don't know where you came from, you know. Milkman, I don't know. No, Mom, no. You know, I mean, they made jokes about that. Mother, just an example. One time, Mama said, "Bibba, what do you get when you you cast your bread upon the waters?" And I remember I was like, really, I was 5, again 5, and adults look so tall, and I remember thinking, I didn't have the vocabulary, but I remember looking up to her and thinking, in today's vocabulary, that is the stupidest question I've ever heard. So I answered her, and I said, well, Mom, it gets soggy and sinks. I mean, already it was like having a science brain. She just shook her head again and said, you know, we're in trouble. So I was 5 and 6 when I became totally aware of the discrepancies. I was so protected, along with all of my friends. There's some beautiful people in Mountain Brook, really wonderful, wonderful people. But we were highly protected from everything, and that's not necessarily a great thing. Justice Jackson talked about that, and along with a few other ones, they all touched on that you have to, she was taught the honesty of her history by her parents. And without that honesty, they said, you're going to have to hear this. This is not nice, it's horrible, it's life-threatening, it's to you even, because you could get so depressed, whatever. She didn't go into that, but they said you have to know the truth in order to be a part of that and to change it. And if you're always hiding the truth because you're afraid it's going to hurt somebody, that's already a bad direction, because you cannot change anything unless you know the ABCs of the real ones, of why it happened and to whom it happened and what were the consequences of that happening. There were no consequences for these people. I did not hear about the Children's Crusade. I mean, living in, we didn't hear about the bombing really. Of course, our parents knew, but it was never spoken of, and it was just like a silence. I remember that. I still have that sense that something's wrong, and I just sense that something's wrong, you know, badly wrong, and it was during that week, I think, that the situation, the horror that had happened just 3 miles from my house had taken place. And I just didn't understand. I still don't understand. I don't understand what's wrong with people at all. Just such ignorance, you know. And so it wasn't talked about. The Children's Crusade wasn't talked about. The bombing wasn't talked about. But it seeped out, you know, as things like that do. Truth does eventually seep out. A great story about Mary and my brother Julian, who he used to call Doodlebug back in town. And we would go, we were not really allowed to go over the hill. But of course, stories about that later. I was just a born rebel. Of course I did. And so Mary would take us there was a theater in Homewood. And the Coloreds, as you know, they had their stairwell. And that was the same time, of course, for different drinking fountains. And that was puzzling to me. But going up that stairwell into the balcony with Mary, Mac, and Doodle, of course, we were totally irreverent, you know, and thought we were the king and queen. Like if you ever see Albert Hall or something, we were the king and queen, you know. It was great. We just loved it. And of course, there were African Americans all around us, and so we just. But still, that brought a lot of questions on for Mary, you know, and she was just so generous and kind and patient, because she would take the time to explain it in language for a 6-year-old, you know. I'm sure it was like, that's just the way it is, and don't you worry, and she was just terribly compassionate, and my mother was very compassionate also, so it was just fitting that Mary was also an extension of all of the things that we felt. Philip Alford and I were friends because I was working at Town and Gown under Hatcher, who was running the little theater, which is now the Virginia Sanford Theater, I think. And so To Kill a Mockingbird came to town, and Philip Calder came by. You know, we didn't have cell phones or anything, so he could have just come and knocked on the door and said, "You want to go to the movies with me?" I said, "Sure, what?" He said, "Mine." I went, "Okay," you know, and we went. And I think we were just 16. I'm not quite sure. You'd have to look up the dates. Maybe he was 16, I was 15. But I just remember, and it was a matinee, so it must have been in the summer. And it was bedazzling to me, because here was this little tiny face when I turned to see him, and there was this huge face on the screen. And it was the first time I was able to have that kind of connection with an actor or someone that I knew, you know, and there we were holding hands, and that was it. And later on, we got together out in Hollywood when I was out going to school at UCLA, so that was kind of fun too. Early on, in Crestline and Mountain Brook Junior High School, there was, as far as I can remember, maybe only one Chinese family, and that was the Young family. They had Joy Youngs, and they were, oh my gosh, just wonderful people. And we were terrible, my brother and I, in their restaurant. I'm sorry, I'm apologizing today. They had a chute that we had never seen, and we would go at the top, and we would gather all of these napkins, and I would run down to the basement, and they would let me. And I'd stick my head in the chute, and I'd yell to my brother, "Okay, I'm ready," and he'd scream, "Bombs away!" Everything in America is related to guns and munitions, you know. "Bombs away!" And it would echo through this metal chute, and it'd smash me in the face, and I'd just laugh so hard, and I said, "Let's do it again!" You know? So, and they never stopped us. They were so kind. And Mr. Young actually even came over and showed us and taught us how to grow bean sprouts. Yeah, I was just crazy about the family. And that's where we learned to use chopsticks at 5 years old, you know. The communist Jewish conspiracy, no, but it has caused, since most of my best friends were Jews, it would be pretty hard to sell that one to me. I didn't hear that until the last decade from a member of my family living in Boston. And I thought, are you out of your mind? I'd never heard about it. I'd never heard about this Jewish communist conspiracy. It's just idiocy, you know. I don't think anybody would have said anything to me about Jews, since, I mean, I was spending the night and drinking wine on Friday nights. That was Lori Allen. She was our former lady of Alabama, but I remember that was the first time I'd ever tasted wine. I used to spend the night over there a lot, and I remember one time saying, "Could I have some more, please?" I learned that from Dickens, you know. "More girl, more wine, please." So they just looked, they were so great. They laughed, of course. We were at Mountain Brook Junior High School and Crestline, and then Shades Valley. I was the last class to, 1967 was the last class of Brookies to graduate from Shades Valley. And my brother, who was just a year behind me, Julian, he was the first to graduate from Mountain Brook High School. I will say something about Shades Valley, because it became integrated just barely. I think there were, I don't know the number, but maybe 10 African Americans that were trying to integrate into Shades Valley. And I remember how terribly they were treated. I mean, bad things, like trying to trip them on the stairs. I mean, it was, and I just remember taking a stand as a tiny one, you know, because you're not really quite sure what's going on, but you know that that's wrong. I mean, I knew it was wrong. I was raised to know that that was wrong. And it didn't matter what this tiny little nano layer of your epidermis, what color, which it just didn't matter. You don't hurt people. You're not maliciously trying to injure someone. And so I, you know, befriended a couple of them. And that went on into the University of Alabama also. I was called in to the Dean of Women at the University of Alabama, and of course I'm standing up and at attention, you know, kind of, and Miss MacQueen, you cannot sit at the colored table for dinner at Martha Parham. I said, yes, ma'am. You will be expelled. Do you understand me, young lady? And I said, yes, ma'am, you know. And where did I go back and eat dinner at Martha Parham that night? I certainly did. I sat down with my friends. And the woman that was in the play with me, and we were running lines, you know, and we were working together on Camino Real, I think, Tennessee Williams' piece. And that's why we were sitting together and we were friends. It seems to me that she was one of the first black Alabama beauties for homecoming. And it has to be her, because I remember saying to her, having a conversation with her, are you out of your mind? Because at that time they sat on the back of convertibles. All the, you know, you had the queen and the whatever and all the maids, and you are going to be a target, you know. This is, you know, 1963 had already come and gone. This was 1967, 68, and it was just really close. And I said, are you out, I remember that, are you out of your mind? And she said, I've got to do it. And I said, okay. So I defied the Dean of Women, and frankly, I wasn't worried about being expelled because of the privilege that I have of being from the largest family at the University of Alabama, alumni, and they were not going to expel a Brooks. And these are things that you grow up with, and this kind of privilege that you sometimes take advantage, like I did. I just stood my ground in front of the Dean of Women. And then I was called in a second time. Miss MacQueen, yes, ma'am. You need to lower that hem on your dress. Yes, ma'am. Right away, ma'am. She said, or you will be brought back in and there will be consequences. I think she might have said expelled again, but I knew that was just hollow threats. And that week I was a Bama Belle. So I was in a mini skirt. Did not bring that hem down. I told her, I said, this is the fashion in the rest of our country, in New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles and Paris, and that was Twiggy time, you know. There was a picture of me in the, what is it called, the little Alabama paper? It was darling. Anyway, there I was with my mini skirt. And so that was 2 shots against Elizabeth MacQueen. Well, all books, I mean, including the Bible, I would write in the margins, always, with devil's advocate or pointing out the hypocrisy. I've been really good at it. I'm still good at it. So all of my books were marked up. I just knew that the things that they were saying about African Americans just was not true, because I was friends with African Americans. I had an African American lover. I mean, hello. It was just absurd. And I always thought that our school books should have been rewritten, and I would have been volunteering to help write them. It was just, they're still wrong. And look what they're trying to do with the books now. I mean, it's insane. So I wrote a lot in the margins. and I still do that today. I did it for my daughter when she was being confirmed. And I said, think about this, think about that, you know. I knew I wanted to be an artist from the time I was born, but then really wanted to be an artist when a whole bunch of us, there were 3 train cars that were sent to New York and Washington, D.C., and I got to Greenwich Village. We were only 12 and 13 years old, and we got to Greenwich Village, and I just thought, this is really fun, drawing with an easel out on the sidewalk. And I came back and they said, well, what did you learn? And I said, I know what I want to be. And they said, what? You know, because we had gone to the Senate, we had gone to just all of these extraordinary, the Smithsonian. And I said, I know what I want to be. I know what I want to be. What is that? I want to be an artist. I mean, you could have put a pin in, they just both deflated, you know. How I became aware of the competition for creating a monument or memorial to the 4 girls, I was on my way. I had been living out of the country, and then I came back and I said, well, maybe I should come back to the U.S. And I was on my way to Martha's Vineyard. I had already made contacts there, and I was thinking about living there. And that came about by my friend Lynn Edwards, Angel, who had moved there with her husband David Angel, who was one of the writers for Cheers. And I had her card, her new address, sitting in the sill of my window, and I was supposed to go up there, you know. And we hadn't seen each other for a long time, and but kept vaguely in contact. You know, it wasn't so easy before cell phones and everything. So she had, of course, she was already dead because she was in the second plane, and she and David were in first class. And but that idea of Martha's Vineyard from her stayed with me all that time, and I kept her card for the longest time. So I was on my way to Martha's Vineyard, and I was staying with Hank and Martha, and they said, hey, Elizabeth, look, this is, and he had ripped it out of the newspaper and handed it. It was only just this little bitty tattered piece of paper, and he said, look, this is for you, this is for you. And I said, what is it? And I went, oh my God. And I said, you're right, that's for me. You know, this is right down my alley. I'd already done some first women, many things I've done have always had a foundation of justice, or lack of justice is better, a lack of justice. So we had 5 days, and Martha started, Hank's wife, Martha, I said, I need an assistant, I can't do this. They've had months, the other people, I didn't know who I was competing against. And so Martha said, I'll help you. And I said, cool. So we had 5 days, 4 nights and 5 days. And Evelyn Allen, Lori Allen Siegelman's mom, who was my second mom, said, come up and use my apartment. And she was way up on Red Mountain with this extraordinary view of Jones Valley and Birmingham. She said, come on up. And what a place to be inspired. And so Martha and I just took over her whole living room with papers all over the floor. I didn't have time to do digital. I didn't have time to do any of the things that I normally do to go into a national or international competition. It's usually super clean, you know, and flash drives, digital, CDs, and didn't have time to do that. I didn't have time to really get a board, and so it was on a cardboard board that I brought to Shervis later. And fast forward the story, I went around trying to get interviews from people, and Carolyn McKinstry was speaking downtown, and I saw that, and I went and listened to her speak, and I, bless her heart, I just dogged her, you know, and waited till the crowd dispersed, and then I went down and sat down by her. By this time, she sat down on a bench, and I think this is at the Alabama Performing Arts Center or somewhere downtown. And I don't know. I felt like Tom Hanks sitting, waiting for the bus, sitting next to her, just waiting for that moment to say something, you know, not to be intrusive and to be polite. And finally I said, hi, and I introduced myself. I'm Elizabeth MacQueen, and I'm going to be doing the Four Spirits. I'm going to be doing the Four Girls. I said, I really need you to tell me the story about your last vision that you remember after all these years about what the girls were doing in the bathroom before the bomb went off. And she sat there and she told me. She was exhausted, and she still sat there and gave me her time and heart and recollection, which is never easy. And that's where I got the image. So we said our goodbyes and have remained friends ever since. And I raced back home to Martha. I've got it. So I started with, like, you know, the shill game with the cups and the P underneath. So I had four, and I had four figures, and I kept moving them around and saying, okay, does that one look okay? No. Then I'd move them around again. How's that look? Oh, which one is this? And I'd go through the girls. I'd never remember their names in order. I'd always miss someone, like my mother, you know. She'd go through all of our names, and one of us would always be missing, you know. Bib, you know. And so I finally got this, and after talking to people and researching, I found out what each girl's favorite thing was and where they were destined to go had they lived. And so that's how I got the different poses. Addie Mae, I can remember what she was doing. She was tying Denise's bow. I mean, literally, just, you know, getting it all nice and tight, you know, pretty. And so she was a great helper, you know. She was someone who enjoyed helping people. And she was tying Denise's bow, and Denise's father was a photographer, right? Right. So she was in this fabulous dress, as always. Cynthia loved books. And so I had her reading a book, you know, just being patient. She was really quiet and patient. And so the girls are fussing around, and she's there, oh God, you know, I'm just going to be patient. And I'm just going to open a book and read, and when my friends are ready, we'll go upstairs. So that's, you know, who knows what she would have been. Carol, she was a leader, and that's why I have her in the front going, what's wrong with you girls? Come on, we got to go up. And I think she's the one that had every Girl Scout badge. Normally a piece like this takes at least a year and a half. And I had to do it in 4 months and 5 days, installed, shipped and installed. I had a great team at the Foundry. I had a great team. They weren't victims. A victim is someone that has to, Sarah because she lived, you know. I consider her a victim. And I was the first one to mention her. I don't think she even knows that. I was the first one to mention that she was never taken care of by the community or any community. And I found that just terribly unfair. Again, terribly, she needed to be taken care of. She needed to have attention. She needed the community to rally for her and say how extraordinary it is that she's going to live. And is there a reason for, I mean, the things that we do today, you know, they didn't do that for her. And I was the first one, I'm positive, to bring that out in the open. I felt it very unjust. And just like sweeping something underneath the rug. I mean, nobody wanted to deal with it. The two boys that were killed, Virgil and Johnny, I had a deep dive into the research to do the four girls. You don't just, you can't create something that has some sort of deep foundation and deep meaning without researching it, because all of that comes out through your hands into the clay and eventually into the bronze. But when I found out those two boys were killed and how they were killed the same day, I just couldn't understand why I'd never heard about them, and why in the same breath with the four girls that they didn't say there were 6 children killed, not 4 girls, 6 children killed, murdered, 6 children murdered, you know, and I went deep diving into that, and I looked up police reports, and not easy, and one was shot in the back. And the report said that they were coming at us and we were fearful. And I said, if someone's coming at you, they were throwing rocks. If someone's coming at you, how do you shoot them in the back? I was appalled. And then there were these 2 joyriders on the bicycle, and a brother and 2 brothers riding on a bike, one riding on the handlebars, as we all used to do. And 2, you know, joyriders, ignorant white boys, came in with a gun and just shot them, riding a bike. I just thought, I just can't believe I came from this mire, this horrifying area. Oh, the event yesterday at the 16th Street Baptist Church, that was the 60th anniversary of the murder of the girls, of the 4 girls. And Justice Jackson came, and she was brilliant. Terry Sewell came, another brilliant woman, just absolutely incredible. And then a teacher, Harris, Mrs. Harris, I think was her name. I wish I had the program in front of me. And it was just so lovely to see so many women of color who had done these extraordinary things and had great parenting, and you know, we were never taught that. I mean, that was one of the untruths that we were not, that was shared with us, that there was a lack of education and a lack of this and a lack of a lot of things. And I was just so happy, and they were too. Just we were just all together, and finally it just felt like we were one big family. I've always felt that way, but it was great to see that kind of emotion and hopefulness in the church, and talking about how they had had such great parenting in those times, which makes their parents really heroes, you know. I don't feel like there's been a whole lot of change underneath. However, being in the media section yesterday and hearing all of those people speak was riveting and hopeful. I've lived in 8 countries, 4 languages, and the prejudice of Birmingham, you know, I told my daughter, first of all, I taught her race with a pack of construction paper. And I laid out all the colors, you know, the primary colors out. White. I said, I put my arm next to it. I said, is this white, darling? She was 3. No, Mama, that's not white. I said, okay. I said, put out the red one. Does this look like Indians that you've seen in the Western movies? And no, Mama, they're not. Then I pulled out the black one. Baby, have you ever seen somebody, a human being, this color, you know? And she said, no, Mom. I said, okay, you have to realize that you're going to be told that these are the only colors that we have on the planet of people. It's a lie. It's not true. I didn't quite say it's a lie to a 3-year-old, but I said, it's just not true, sweetheart. We are all of these colors mixed together, and everybody has a different hue, a different value, and if you ever meet someone that is black like this like this construction paper, run, because they're alien. If you ever meet someone that's red like this, and they say, you know, they're human, run, it's not true. And if you meet somebody like this, besides albinos maybe, I said run because they're an alien, you know. And that's, I mean, I'm trying to teach someone just going into kindergarten. And I have said to my African American friends, even then, with people African Americans I was very, very close to, that I was asked to be married by my African American lover out in California, and I said, Philip, I can't do this. Philip Battle was his name, and I'd love to find him. I said, Philip, I just can't. There's so much that's stuffed inside of me like a goose for Christmas that if we ever had an argument or it came out, it would be horrible. And I love you so much that I could never, ever subject you to that kind of cruelty and hate. I said, but I can guarantee you, this stops now. My children will never have this prejudice about color or race or culture. And I said, I can promise you that. So, and I did it. My daughter has not an ounce of prejudice towards people because of where they're born or where they're from or their language or the color of their skin or their eyes or what their job is or what their job isn't. And I'm just really proud of that. Sorry. It's the first time I said that out loud. I said, it stops here.